Hi. On September the 7th, 2014, in an article in the Daily Mail, the famous physicist Professor Stephen Hawking warned that according to his calculations, the planet we're living in is unstable and therefore might collapse. This news, unsurprisingly, sent the media world into a buzz. Dr. Joseph Licken, a theoretical physicist at the University of Chicago, confirmed Professor Hawking's findings when he said, if you use all the physics that we know now and you do what you think is a straightforward calculation, it is bad news, and it may be that the universe we live in is inherently unstable. We're sort of right on the edge where the universe can last for a long time, but eventually it should go boom. There's no principle that we know of that would put us right on the edge. Dr. Benjamin Alanacht, a theoretical physicist at the University of Cambridge, further elaborates on the reason for this instability when he talks about a particular particle that exists in the universe called the Higgs boson particle. The observed 126 giga-electron-volts Higgs boson mass seems to imply the universe does not exist in the lowest possible energy state, but is in fact positioned in a slightly unusual place. If the Higgs boson mass were really 127 giga-electron-volts and the top mass were a little lower than its most likely value, then actually the universe would be completely stable and the vacuum would be in the true minimum. Meaning that under the simplest assumptions, the measured mass of Higgs could mean that the universe is unstable and destined to fall apart. So basically, according to numerous physicists, careful calculations and computations, we're all doomed. The Quran, which dates back 1400 years ago, substantiates the predictions and calculations of physicists such as Hawking, Licken and Alanacht. The potential of the universe collapsing and being wiped out is real. The creator of the universe is well aware of what he created. But it's not all bad news. The Quran then goes on to assure us that God prevents the universe from collapse when he writes in the Quran, God holds the heaven from falling on the earth. Furthermore, the Quran states that God prevents the universe from being wiped out. God holds the heavens and the earth lest they are wiped out. So what will the end of the world look like exactly, and what part do the Higgs boson particles play in all this? In 1960, the British scientist Peter Higgs predicted the existence of tiny particles that we cannot see, but that are, in fact, in us and all around us. These particles are responsible for giving objects their mass and explain why particles have the mass that they do. Without Higgs boson, you and I and everything we see around us would have no mass and therefore would not be able to exist. The other physicists at that time also agreed with Mr. Higgs that this particle exists, as he had sound calculations to prove his theory, and they called these subatomic particles Higgs particles, after Peter Higgs. On March the 14th, 2013, about half a century after it was first predicted, scientists at CERN, the European Organisation for Nuclear Research, tentatively confirmed they have found the Higgs boson particle, and the Nobel Prize in Physics was subsequently awarded jointly to Peter Higgs and his colleague François Englert. In order to discover the subatomic Higgs particle, CERN had built a large hadron collider at the cost of about $10 billion to simulate the conditions of the formation of the universe. In 1993, a group of British physicists went to the UK Science Minister at the time, William Waldegrave, to ask if he could help fund the building of the Large Hadron Collider in order to help prove the existence of the Higgs particle. Having no clue what they were talking about, Mr. Waldegrave announced he would award a vintage bottle of champagne to the physicist who came up with the best way to explain the Higgs field and the Higgs boson to the general public. And it was Professor David Miller who took home the prize with his famous analogy. Imagine a cocktail party of political party workers who are uniformly distributed across the floor, all talking to their nearest neighbours. If the ex-Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher enters the room, many of the workers will run toward her and form a cluster around her. As she moves, other workers run toward her, while the ones she has left return to their places. Because of the knot of people running toward her forming a cluster and then returning back to their spots, she acquires mass. These clusters, which run towards Mrs. Thatcher and then disappear as they return back to their spots, are an analogy to Higgs bosons. So if that's the Higgs field, how does the Higgs boson fit into all of this? Let's pretend our crowd of partygoers is uniformly spread across the room. Now consider a rumour passing through our room full of people. Those near the door run to hear it first and cluster together to get the details. Then they return to their original spots and tell their neighbours, who then run and cluster together to hear it too. Then they return to their original spots and tell their next neighbours, and so on. The result will be a wave of clusters running across the room that disappear as soon as they run. These clusters are an analogy to Higgs bosons. So to summarise, Higgs boson is an elusive subatomic particle that we can't see, but can see how it gives particles substance or mass. It's essentially what gives shape, size and mass to everything that exists. But the problem is that the Higgs particle that the LHC had found possesses a mass of approximately 126 giga-electron volts, and this has made physicists rather nervous because they believe it should be 127. According to physicists such as Stephen Hawking, Joseph Litton and Benjamin Allenach, this discrepancy could very well mean the collapse of the universe and everything in it, including you and I, as everything will become massless. And they are not alone in their assertions. In fact, the Quran also swears that this will take place when the world ends, when it says, "It is the day when people will be like scattered moths, and the mountains shall be as loosened wool." People like moths and mountains like wool sounds like mass loss to me. But there's something else too. In chapter 81 of the Quran, a chapter where God describes in detail the events of the end of the world, there are two particular verses that are of great interest to us and what we've just learned. "So verily I, God, swear by clusters you can't see, as soon as they run, they disappear." That's the English translation, but the words used in the original Arabic are more nuanced than a translation can express. Three words in particular that are used in this verse are khunnes and al-jawari al-kunes. Khunnes refers to something invisible, and al-jawari means something that is running. Al-kunes refers to something that disappears and returns back to its original spot. So if you put the three words together, we're talking about invisible clusters that run and that disappear almost as soon as they appear. Almost as soon as they start running, they stop and disappear. So what are these clusters that the Quran is describing? They're none other than the infamous and elusive Higgs boson particles, which explains why the end of the universe will come about not due to volcanic activity, meteor showers, or an asteroid hitting the Earth, as NASA claims. The universe will end due to mass loss.